Mr. Speaker, in relation to an incident that took place, and I want to quote it as well. The Minister may be aware, and if not, he'll be aware shortly, that the APPG for Freedom of Religious Belief that I chair had their website hacked as well, and the text which questioned human rights violations by China, and it was removed. I reported that to Mr. Speaker and made him aware of what had took place. It is clear that nothing whatsoever is secret to them, and the work of this House by the elected members of this House is not treated with respect. So will the Deputy Prime Minister commit to stop handling the Chinese oversteps, for want of a better description, with kid gloves, and instead with authority, and help them to understand very clearly that they will not trample over democracy in this place or others without being held accountable to the very strictest terms?
Yes, we will certainly hold them to account in the way that the honourable gentleman describes. And in relation to the attack he describes, I will very happily make sure both parliamentary authorities and the National Cyber Security Centre are in touch with him about it.
So, Geoffrey Clifton-Brown.
Deputy Speaker, we do know that the legacy systems, IT systems, are the most likely to be attacked in cyber. Has the Deputy Prime Minister, would he and has he ordered an inventory to be taken of all government IT equipment to see where particularly vulnerabilities lie?
Yes is the answer, and I think my honourable friend is absolutely right to raise this issue. The first step is to properly understand where those vulnerabilities lie, and we've undertaken extensive work to ensure we know where risks lie, and we are putting in place measures to remediate those risks.
Chris Law.
Speaker, this is too little and too late. It is reactive, not proactive. Two lowly officials get sanctioned when half the UK population's data and electoral roll gets cyber attacked. Just to give you a quick quote to remind you how serious this is, and I don't feel it's been taken seriously enough. Just in October last year, MI5 warned, and I quote, of epic scale of Chinese espionage, reporting more than 20,000 people in the UK having been covertly approached online by Chinese spies. And our own Commons Intelligence and Security Committee said China was, and I quote, prolifically and aggressively targeting the UK and had managed to successfully penetrate every sector of the UK's economy. So my question is very simple. How can any one of us and anyone outside of here, and including the entire society, trust this UK government when it's far too late and it does very little about what needs to be done?
I simply don't accept that characterisation. When it was this government that set up the National Cyber Security Centre, it's this government that set up the Ministerial Cyber Board, it's this government that's invested £2.6 billion into our cyber defences, and I have consistently warned about the cyber threats facing the United Kingdom time after time again, and we are taking steps to address those.
Bob Seeley.
Deputy Speaker, every time the Deputy Prime Minister comes here, and he's very eloquent in the plans that he lays out, he's more assertive, and we're doing this bit new and that bit new as we react to the threat. Isn't there an issue, though, that we still need to have a much greater sense of coherence across all government departments about how we deal with this threat, whether it's students, whether it's protection of Hong Kong citizens, whether it's intellectual property, or whether it's cyber attacks?
Well, I think my honourable friend raised an important point, and I pay tribute to the work that he's done in this space, and I've discussed it with him on many occasions. He is right that the UK government, in common with US government and others around the world, has evolved enormously in its approach to China. The sort of China that we had hoped for even a decade ago is not the China we have now, whether it's in relation to Hong Kong, whether it's in relation to Xinjiang or elsewhere. We are continuing to increase our efforts, and in the area that the honourable gentleman describes, that's precisely why we set up the Defending Democracy Task Force, which is being led by my right honourable friend, the Security Minister.
And Oswald.
Deputy Speaker, the Deputy Prime Minister is right to address these issues and, as he said, to call it out. But I don't think calling it out really cuts the mustard here. There's certainly no appearance of urgency. And there's a worrying sense of nothing to see here in some of his responses. He did reference human rights. We know well the issues there, including the horrific forced labour and worse that the Uyghur population face. Then the action that he is outlining on all of these fronts is very underwhelming and actually a bit baffling in that regard. So I wonder, does the Deputy Prime Minister think that the large number of members all across this House today, who are obviously very much underwhelmed by his statement, are all wrong? Or does he think it's possible that the content of his statement is somehow missing the mark?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, first of all, I think it's very important to remember that ultimately, and I want to reassure the House and the public, that these attempts were unsuccessful. I'm not being complacent, I'm setting out the facts in terms of the risk. Whether it was at Cyber UK in Belfast last year, when I warned that cyber threats continue to come from the usual suspects, Russia, China, Iran or North Korea, whether it's in relation to Government Security Conference, where I called out Russian state interference, whether it's in relation to creating secure by design, we have not hesitated to take action, and we will continue to take action.
Speaker, democracy is not perfect, but the right to choose the people who make the laws that govern us is a really precious right, and it is really scary to hear that a foreign power might be trying to intervene on this. Mr Deputy Speaker, as one of the few women who's spoken in this statement, I want to remind you again how concerned I am about the threats and harassment that women get when standing for Parliament, especially as we get closer to election. As well as cybersecurity, I am very concerned about physical security. 2.5 years ago, my Essex neighbour was murdered at his constituency surgery. Last Friday, at my constituency surgery, the security operatives recommended by this Parliament failed to show up for the second time this year. So I am very grateful to the Deputy Prime Minister for recently putting extra money into security for both parliamentarians and candidates. But can you look again at the workings of this House and how our security is governed? Because that funding is not getting to those of us on the front line.
Well, I think my right-hand friend raises a concerning allegation, which I will take up from the government side, working with House authorities. As she will be aware, we do take this threat exceptionally seriously, which is why we agreed an unprecedented increase in protective security for members of this House and other elected representatives. This is something we should all take very seriously, not least in the light of the two appalling murders of parliamentarians that I've seen in my time in this House.
Jim Barron.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. When it comes to matters of national security like this, my temptation clearly is surely to work cross-party and to have a unified face on this. All the same, doesn't the Deputy Prime Minister understand that the relative weakness of the response to this terrible series of attacks, when combined then with his evasiveness over questions around the financial interests of the Foreign Secretary, are bound to increase people's concerns? It is understood that Lord Cameron still has close links to the Chinese state with numerous business ventures, and we also know, for example, that it was reported last week that the government has secretly softened its policy against Chinese businesses implicated in human rights abuses. So will he strengthen his response and demonstrate by his actions and by transparency that this soft peddling is nothing suspicious?
Well, the honourable gentleman stands up and says we should have a cross-party approach, then immediately seeks on political grounds to denigrate the Foreign Secretary and turn this into a party political matter. I'm afraid he has to choose one approach or the other.
Mr. Speaker, when we think ahead to the election, one of the points that's been raised today is about artificial intelligence and the threat to democracy. We often talk about the concept of deep fake news. It used to be fake news, but it's not just about deep fakes. It's the risk of rumour bombs happening to get people to not go to the polls on the day. It's about voice clones where people may be phoned up to be told that they're pretending to be their daughter or their family member saying don't go and vote today. There are many risks that we may not even be aware of. And the data that we're talking about today may be used in conjunction with data from Facebook and from other places to pretend that they are something that they are not. So can I ask, along with the work that's going on within government and with tech companies, can we also look at an education campaign to let the public know that there are better ways to be aware of the risks that they may be under during the election? Thank you.
I think my honourable friend makes a really important point, because there will always be limitations at a time with rapidly evolving technology, particularly artificial intelligence, the ability of agencies or the companies themselves to be able to call this stuff out. There needs to be greater awareness from the public about the risks and the fact that they should treat these kind of images with a much higher degree of scepticism than they did previously, and it's something I will be taking up with my colleague, the Education Secretary.
Moynihan.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Professor Jim Saker, who is the President of the Institute of Motor Industry, has warned about the threat that Chinese manufactured electric vehicles could pose, giving access to big data and personal information. He has gone on to say that Chinese connected EVs flooding the country could be the most effective Trojan horse that the Chinese establishment has to impact the UK. Can I ask the Deputy Prime Minister what consideration he has given to the threat posed by Chinese manufactured EVs?
Well, I think the Honourable Lady raises a very important point. Clearly, any new technology or cars put on the UK market will have to meet with our safety standards, and it will include an assessment of those sort of threats. So what I would say is that we also work in conjunction with the National Security and Investment Act, under which I can make decisions to block or impose conditions on any investments or transactions from whichever state they come from, companies in whichever country they come from. So again, that's another tool in our weaponry which we didn't have previously.
Jones.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend will no doubt be aware that the Electoral Commission failed an NCSC Cyber Essentials audit around the time that these breaches occurred. Among the failings identified were staff laptops and smartphones running outdated systems, and including Windows 10 Enterprise, which at the relevant time was no longer receiving security updates. Does my right honourable friend not agree that these failings look awfully like extraordinary negligence on the part of the Electoral Commission? And how satisfied is he that they have done everything necessary to regularise their procedures?
Well, I think the right honourable gentleman is right to highlight that, and it's precisely because of those concerns that we've ensured the Electoral Commission is working very closely with the National Cyber Security Centre to achieve a significant step up in their capabilities and their cyber resilience. It was essential that that work was undertaken, and it has been undertaken.
Alexander Stafford.
Very much indeed, Mr Deputy Speaker. In May this year, we have local elections in Rotherham, like other places across the country. Now, the last local election in 2021, Labour kept control of Rotherham Council by only 54 electors. So what steps is the government putting in place to make sure when people go and cast their votes in May for the Conservatives in Rotherham, those votes are secure to end 50 years of Labour rule?
Well, I trust and hope that they will achieve that outcome. I would like to assure members that we have every confidence in the integrity of those elections and through the Defending Democracy Task Force, through my colleague, the Minister for Local Government, who has written out to all local authorities in the past week. We are ensuring that the integrity of those important elections is preserved.
I'd like to thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his statement today and for responding to questions for over an hour. We're now moving on to the next statement on Women's State Pension Age Report. Mel Stride.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And Mr Deputy Speaker, with your permission, I would like to make a statement to provide an interim update on the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman's investigation in the way changes to the state pension age were communicated to women born in the 1950s. I'm grateful to the Ombudsman for conducting this investigation. I recognise the strength of feeling there is on this issue, and it is important to set out the wider context and our initial understanding of the report itself. The fact it has taken over 5 years for the Ombudsman to produce the final report reflects the complexity of this matter. The period the investigation considers spans around 30 years, dating back to the decision Parliament took in 1995 to equalise the state pension age for men and women gradually from 2010. Since then, Mr Deputy Speaker, changes have been made through a series of Acts of Parliament by successive governments, which resulted in the state pension age rising to 65 for women by November 2018 and then to 66 by October 2020. The announcement in 1993 to equalise the state pension age addressed a long-standing inequality between men and women. These changes were about maintaining the right balance between the sustainability of the state pension, fairness between generations, and ensuring a dignified retirement in later life. Women retiring today, Mr. Deputy Speaker, can still expect to receive the state pension for over 21 years on average, over 2 years longer than for men. Had the government not equalised the state pension age, women would have been retiring today at 60, and they could have spent, on average, over 40% of their adult lives in receipt of state pension. This would have been unfair, as by the 1990s, life expectancy had significantly increased compared to 1948, when state pension age for women was set at 60. In turning to the investigation itself, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think it is important to be clear about what the Ombudsman has not said, particularly following some of the inaccurate and misleading commentary since the report was published. The Ombudsman has not looked at the decision to equalise the state pension age, but rather at how that decision was communicated by DWP. The report hinges on the Department's decisions over a narrow period between 2005 and 2007, and the effect of those decisions on individual notifications. The Ombudsman has not found that women have directly lost out financially as a result of DWP's actions, with the report stating, and I quote, "We do not find DWP's communication resulted in them," referring to the complainants, "suffering direct financial loss." And the final report has not said that all women born in the 1950s will have been adversely impacted, as many women were aware their state pension age had changed. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in his Stage 1 report, what the Ombudsman did find was that, and I quote, "Between 1995 and 2004, DWP's communication of changes to state pension age reflected the standards they would expect it to meet." That report also confirms that accurate information about changes to the state pension age was publicly available in leaflets, through DWP's pension education campaigns, through DWP's agencies, and on its website. However, when considering the DWP's actions between August 2005 and December 2007, the Ombudsman came to the view that those actions resulted in 1950s-born women receiving individual notice later than they might had different decisions been made. Mr. Deputy Speaker, during the course of the Ombudsman's investigation, it is important to remember that the state pension age changes were considered by the courts. In 2019 and 2020, the High Court and the Court of Appeal, respectively, found no fault with the actions of DWP. The courts made clear that under successive governments dating back to 1995, the action taken was entirely lawful and did not discriminate on any grounds. During these proceedings, the Court of Appeal held that the High Court was entitled to conclude as a fact that there has been, and I quote, "adequate and reasonable notification given by the publicity campaigns implemented by the Department over a number of years." Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Ombudsman has taken 5 years to produce his final report. As the Chief Executive of the Ombudsman herself has set out, DWP has fully cooperated with the Ombudsman's investigation throughout this time and provided thousands of pages of detailed evidence. We continue to take the work of the Ombudsman very seriously, and it is only right that we now fully and properly consider the findings and the details of what is a substantial document. The Ombudsman has noted in his report the challenges and the complexities of this issue. In laying the report before Parliament, the Ombudsman has brought matters to the attention of the House, and we will provide a further update to the House once we have considered the report's findings. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this government has a strong track record of supporting all pensioners. In 2023-24, we will spend over £151 billion on support for pensioners. That is 5.5% of GDP. That includes around £124 billion for the state pension. We are committed to ensuring the state pension remains the foundation of income and retirement now and for future generations. That is why we're honouring the triple lock by increasing the basic and new state pensions by 8.5% from next month. This sees the full rate of the new state pension rise by £900 a year, and of course follows last year's rise of 10.1%. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, we now have 200,000 fewer pensioners in absolute poverty after housing costs than there were in 2010. Our sustained commitment to the triple lock demonstrates our determination to continue to combat pensioner poverty in the future. And that brings me to, it is why, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we have reformed the state pension as well as workplace pensions, improving the retirement outcomes for many women. Our commitment to pensioners is why we introduced automatic enrolment, which has seen millions more women saving into a workplace pension. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this government is committed to supporting pensioners in a sustainable way, providing them with a dignified retirement whilst also being fair to them and to taxpayers. I have set out our strong track record of backing our pensioners. I have also set out our commitment, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to the full and proper consideration of the Ombudsman's report. I note the Ombudsman has laid his final report before Parliament on this issue. Of course, I can assure the House the government will continue to engage fully and constructively with Parliament, as we have done with the Ombudsman.
Ms. Kendall.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement, and the Ombudsman and his staff for all their hard work. This is a serious report that requires serious consideration. The Ombudsman has rightly said it is for the government to respond, but that Parliament should also consider its findings. Members on this side of the House will look carefully at the report too, and continue to listen respectfully to those involved, as we have done from the start. Now, the Secretary of State says he'll provide a further update on this matter to the House. Can I ask him, when? Will he do so when the House returns after the Easter recess? Because this has been going on for years. He rightly says issues around changes in the state pension age have spanned multiple parliaments. But those of us who've been around a little while will remember the turning point which sparked the Waspi campaign was the 2011 Pensions Act, when the then Chancellor and former member for Tatton decided to accelerate increases in the state pension age with very little notice. His comment that this, and I quote, probably saved more money than anything else we've done, understandably angered many women. And at the time, Labour put forward amendments to the Act which would have ensured proper notice was given to women so they could plan for their retirements, which would have gone some way to dealing with this problem. Now, the Ombudsman began investigating how changes in the state pension age were communicated in 2019. In the same year, the High Court ruled the Ombudsman could not recommend changes in the state pension age itself or the reimbursement of lost pensions because that had been decided by Parliament. Now, the Ombudsman's final report, published last week, says in 2004, internal research from the Department for Work and Pensions found around 40% of the women affected knew about changes to the state pension age. Does that remain the government's current assessment? What is the government's assessment of the total number of women who would receive compensation based on the Ombudsman's different options? How many are the poorest pensioners on pension credit? How many are already retired or who have sadly passed away? And when he rises, can the Secretary of State spell out why, given the department already knew there were problems communicating changes in the state pension age, did his government press ahead with changes in the 2011 Pension Act in the way that they did, and in the way that sparked this campaign? Now, the government is currently committed to providing 10 years' notice of future changes to the state pension age. But Labour's 2005 Pension Commission called for 15 years' notice. Has the government considered the merits of a longer time frame and how they would improve communications in future? Labour is fully committed to guaranteeing information about any future changes to the state pension age are provided in a timely and targeted way and, wherever possible, tailored to individual needs. Will the government now do the same? One crucial thing the Secretary of State admitted to say is that the Ombudsman says he has taken the rare decision to ask Parliament to intervene on this issue because he strongly doubts the department will provide a remedy. In light of these concerns, and in order to aid Parliament in its work, will the Secretary of State now commit to laying all relevant information about this issue in the House of Commons Library, including all impact assessments and related correspondence, so lessons can be learnt and so members from across this House can properly do their job, because our current and future pensioners deserve nothing less?
Well, thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and could I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her response, not least on the points of agreement that there appear to be between us, that there are strong feelings, we accept that. There is complexity around these issues. She is quite right to raise the point that they must be given very serious consideration, as she put it, and that we should listen respectfully to all those around all the issues that this matter has raised. She asked when I will be, or the government will be returning with a further update to the House. I can assure her and the House there will be no undue delay in doing that. She made a slightly political point, I think, about the 2011 Act, and I would just very gently remind her, of course, that the Ombudsman's report focuses on that period of time between 2005 and 2007, when it was her party that were actually in government at that time. She asked a series of questions, Mr Deputy Speaker, around various assessments based upon the findings within the report, and of course that goes to the heart of my response, which is that, and I think she agrees with this, we should look very closely at this report in order to make those assessments. It has always been the position on her specific point about notice of changes to state pension age that should be adequate, and indeed in the last review that I undertook of that, there was a delay in the decision for the increase of the state pension age to 68 into the next Parliament, amongst other reasons, to allow just for that point to be addressed. What I think is particularly important now, Mr Deputy Speaker, is that we will fully engage with Parliament, as we did indeed with the Ombudsman. On her point about the Ombudsman, the Chief Executive of the Ombudsman on Sky News on Thursday, the day that the report was published, stated, and I quote, "The government, the DWP, completely cooperated with our report, with our investigation, and over the period of time we have been working, they have provided us with the evidence we have asked for." That is our record in that particular matter. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, can I once again assure the House that the Government will continue to engage fully and constructively with Parliament, as we have done with the Ombudsman.
Caroline Notes.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the Secretary of State's comments and my right honourable friend's emphasis that this is a very complex matter. Of course it is. But the Waspi women have been waiting 5 years for the outcome of the Ombudsman's report, and in his report, and indeed subsequent to his report, he wrote to various select committee chairs across the House, gently encouraging us to keep a weather eye on how quickly the government was going to come forward with a solution. Now look, I recognise that this is an interim update, but I would gently press my right honourable friend. The Waspi women have been waiting 5 years for the Ombudsman. They won't want to wait for a select committee inquiry into this report in order to see action from the government.
Well, can I welcome my right honourable friends, as I have just done to the House, that there will be no undue delay in our approach to this matter. We engaged fully with the Ombudsman. That included over 1,000 pages of evidence. It included a full commentary in respect of the interim report that previous interim report that they published. This report is over 100 pages in length. It is very detailed, and I think it is only right that we do, in an appropriate manner, give it the due attention that it deserves.
Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The timid response from the Labour Party is truly shocking. But regardless of what we've just heard, Waspi women at long last have been finally vindicated after 5 long years by the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman report. 3.8 million women were impacted, of which 270,000 have died without ever receiving their rightful pension. And despite what the Minister says, the verdict of the Ombudsman report on the DWP is damning and unequivocal, and weasel words won't change that. Women born in the 1950s had their pension age raised with little or no notice, and there have been failings at every turn by successive UK governments. The report states these women are owed compensation. The DWP has refused to comply and must be held accountable for doing so, and that there was a failure to adequately inform women of the state pension age change. And these failures, Mr Deputy Speaker, have had a devastating impact on lives, on retirements and the financial and emotional well-being of Waspi women. Many reduced to poverty after being robbed of tens of thousands of pounds of pension. And that suffering has been caused by and is the responsibility of this broken Westminster system and this Westminster cosy consensus. Financial redress is vital for these women in the interests of justice. Clearly Labour are not interested in that, but what we need from the government is a commitment to prompt compensation for these women with no barriers erected to prevent access to it, which recognises their financial loss and distress. We cannot have a situation where Waspi women have their campaign for justice vindicated, yet continue to be ignored, and any attempt to do so will result in a rightful backlash. We in the SNP stand shoulder to shoulder with these women who have been abandoned and betrayed by the UK government and the future Labour government. Can the Secretary of State tell this House what it will take to compensate these women? Do we need another TV drama to embarrass and shame them into doing the right thing? These women are not going away, but the longer this injustice is left unresolved, the greater the number of Waspi women who will die without seeing their pension. Shame on this place.
Well, the Honourable Lady refers to doing the right thing, and I think doing the right thing by the people that the Honourable Lady describes is to look very closely and carefully and diligently at this report. It has been 5 years in gestation. It is detailed. It runs to 100 pages. It draws upon a vast reservoir of evidence, and it is only right and proper, given that the report was only published on Thursday and today is Monday, for all of us to have time to properly consider its findings. Now, the Honourable Lady refers to the general situation of pensioners. All I can say, Mr Deputy Speaker, is that I am very pleased and reassured that this pensions generally is a reserved matter, and that we have been able to increase the state pension last year by 10.1%, this coming year by 8.5%, that we have pressed so hard on promoting pension credit for poorer pensioners, that we had a cost of living payment, that this government centrally as a reserved matter, was able to provide £300 to pensioners last November alongside their winter fuel payment, and that as a consequence of that we have...
Order. The Honourable Lady has asked a question. Please listen to the... Order. Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I was merely pointing out, Mr Deputy Speaker, the fact that we are standing full square right across the United Kingdom, full square behind our pensioners to support them, and that is why under this government there are 200,000 fewer pensioners in poverty after housing costs than there were in 2010.
Siobhan Bailey.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Waspi women across the Stroud constituency have campaigned consistently and constructively. I've grown very fond of them over the number of years where we've had discussions about this. And as the Secretary of State knows, at the heart of this is women saying that they were left unable to plan, or that their plans for their future were scuppered. So it is right that there is a focus on laying out a timetable as soon as possible. And we know that the issue of compensation is key to many of these women. They will have read through the report. So what I would urge the Secretary of State is that as soon as possible, I think it's right that him and his department look through this report in detail, but is able to lay out a timetable and tell these women what is and isn't possible, and manage expectations as soon as possible, because they have waited. Thank you.
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, can I welcome the question from my honourable friend and the member of the Select Committee? Can I reassure her there will be no undue delay, and can I thank her for recognising, I think quite rightly, that we do need to look at these matters with great care, and that doesn't mean coming forward with some of the things that the Scottish National Party may wish us to do on a Monday, given that the report only landed with us on the Thursday.
Chair of the Select Committee, Sir Stephen Timms.
Deputy Speaker, does the Secretary of State agree with the Chair of the Women's Equality Select Committee, as I do, that those affected shouldn't have to wait for the outcome of a Select Committee inquiry before learning the government's response? The equalisation of the state pension age was legislated for in 1995, giving 15 years' notice to those affected. The 2011 changes, which accelerated the process, gave much less than 10 years' notice to those affected. Isn't one of the lessons here of what's gone wrong is that we must make sure that major changes of this kind do provide at least 10 years, preferably 15 years' notice before the changes take effect?
Well, Mr Speaker, the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Chair of the Select Committee, raises the potential role of Select Committees in these matters, which is certainly something that he would have the authority to do if he were minded to do so. It is important that what I do and my department does is to seriously consider the findings within that report before we come to our conclusions, and then to make sure that we come to the House to present those conclusions to the House. And I think that is the most important point.
Nigel Mills.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I have to say, having seen this report, I think this issue has gone on long enough, and we need now to choose a compensation scheme and get this issue finished. So would the Secretary of State confirm that the government will have made its mind up before we get the autumn fiscal event, so we can see it actually set out by that date and how much the cost will be?
Well, clearly, Mr Speaker, as to whether there is an autumn statement at all and the date thereof is not within my remit. Indeed, I wouldn't be absolutely certain that any particular date or autumn statement is pencilled in or otherwise. I think the most important thing, Mr Speaker, is that we recognise, and the message should go out loud and clear from the dispatch box today, that there should be no undue delay in coming to the appropriate conclusions in this matter.
Marsha de Cadova.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Now, the Waspi scandal has been a huge injustice for millions of women, including women in my own Battersea constituency. Now, the Secretary of State has said that he wants to continue to look in detail at the findings of this report, but surely he should be able to make an unambiguous commitment to compensation for these women. You know, the Ombudsman had to take the rare step of laying this before Parliament due to the Department refusing to comply. So, can he say today, or set out a timeline as to when he will come back to this House and set out how he intends to ensure that these women are compensated fully?
Well, the Honourable Lady is attempting to draw me into coming to premature conclusions on some of the findings within the report, which I'm afraid I'm not going to do for the reasons that I've already given. But once again, on this issue of timing, there will be no undue delay.
Chair of the APPG, Peter Aldous.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm most grateful to my right honourable friend for his statement. The Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman is itself Waspi, having been conceived in the 1950s. Would my right honourable friend agree that a failure by government to comply with their recommendations would be almost completely unprecedented over the past 70 years and would in effect drive a coach and horses for an integral part of our system of democratic checks and balances? And with this in mind, can he confirm that his department will work in full haste with Parliament to agree a mechanism for remedy? And can he outline the work that he is carrying out to address the further concerns that have been raised over systematic failure by the DWP over several decades to properly communicate future pension changes?
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, at the heart of this matter is the imperative need to make sure that we fully and carefully examine the findings contained within the report. I'm not going to be drawn today, Mr Deputy Speaker, as to where we may end up in respect of those particular findings. But on the matter of Parliament that my honourable friend raises, I can assure him that we will engage fully and constructively with Parliament on these matters.
Emily Orbach.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. 1950s women entered into a contract with the state. The coalition government reneged on that, denying them their pensions. In their fight for justice, thousands have died. Since the Ombudsman's report, over 100 have passed away. Many continue to live in poverty. Shamefully, the government are now delaying acting on the Ombudsman's findings and have remained silent today on proper compensation. Will the Secretary of State apologise for their long wait for justice?
Well, on the issue of the 2011 Act, as the Honourable Lady will know from the report, the window which has been particularly examined and about which these considerations turn is 2005 to 2007. It was actually at the time when her party was in office. But as a general point and a non-partisan point, my view is that we owe it to all the women who were born in the 1950s to properly look at this report in detail, as I have described, and to engage with Parliament at the same time in an appropriate way.
Sir Jeremy Wright.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend must be correct to refer to the complexity of this situation. One of the aspects of complexity is that what these women have suffered is the loss of an opportunity to plan appropriately for their futures. That is the consequence of the maladministration that the Ombudsman has identified. That, of course, will be different for each individual. So can he say anything about the work his department will now do to think about the appropriate remedy in such diverse circumstances as these? But will he also say, in supporting what my honourable friend for Waveney put to him, that maladministration must have consequences, and therefore it is important for the government to recognise, on behalf of previous governments, that that maladministration must lead to some form of remedy?
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right to refer, as I have done, to the complexities around this issue. He is understandably attempting to draw me in to pass comment on some of the findings in the report itself, which for the reasons I've given I won't be doing this afternoon. But can I just reassure him that whatever the conclusions or findings within the report, as I said in my statement, when these matters went to the court and to the Court of Appeal, the conclusion was that as a matter of fact, the Appeals Court ruled that the High Court could treat as a matter of fact that, quote, there has been adequate and reasonable notification given by the Department over a number of years.
Deirdre Brock.
Returning to that issue of maladministration, I mean, that PHSO's Stage 1 report found clear maladministration in 2021 in the way the DWP communicated those changes and didn't pay attention to its own research showing 1950s-born women didn't know about the changes. And almost 3 years on, the DWP hasn't publicly accepted those findings. So will the Minister finally admit the DWP's failings in this that shortchanged those hundreds of thousands of 1950s Waspi women?
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, without going drawn into too much detail around the report, there is clearly an important distinction between those matters that have been found to be maladministration and those that have been found to be maladministration and led to injustice. But setting that apart, as I've said before, I don't think it's right for me today to start dissecting elements of the report and some of the conclusions that have been arrived at. We will go away, look very carefully at these matters, and will engage with Parliament appropriately.
Holly Mumby-Croft.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can I thank my honourable friend for the clarity with which he set out the history of this issue? He will understand that my constituents who were affected quite reasonably wish to have a similar degree of clarity on what the next steps will be and the timescales for that, and it's my job to come here and communicate to him today their strength of feeling on that. I understand he said he won't be able to set out that timescale today, but can he reassure the House that he has in his mind a timescale for these next steps?
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as I've said on the issue of timing, there should be no undue delay, but my honourable friend is absolutely right that what is required is clarity, and this is why I'm stressing this point, that clarity comes with careful consideration.
Margaret Greenwood.
I pay tribute to all Waspi campaigners and stand in solidarity with them. I need to also declare that I am somebody who was born in the 1950s. The treatment of the 1950s born women in relation to changes to women's state pension has led to great hardship for many. One woman in my constituency struggled to feed herself and had to sell her home as a result. The impact has been devastating. It's estimated that some 270,000 Waspi women have died since the start of the campaign in 2015, and that another dies every 13 minutes. So I note the Minister's comment that there will be no undue delay. Will he return to this House immediately after recess with a firm commitment for fast and fair compensation?
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think we owe it to all of those to whom the Honourable Lady refers to act without undue delay, and that is a commitment that I have made, but equally to look at these matters extremely carefully and make sure we allow time to do that effectively.
James Sunderland.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I welcome the statement from the Secretary of State today, and I'm very grateful for it. I know that he's under pressure this afternoon, but having received a lot of correspondence myself from constituents in Bracknell, and of course other members have as well, and it's a very objective question. Does he have a personal message perhaps for those who are seeking a definitive outcome?
Well, I think my statement, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is the message that we recognise that these are complicated issues, that we have collaborated entirely and fully to the satisfaction of the Chief Executive Officer of the Ombudsman with this particular inquiry and with the report, that we will study its findings very carefully indeed, that we will engage with Parliament constructively as we have done with the Ombudsman.
Marianne Fellows.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Royal Society for the Relief of Indigent Gentlewomen in Scotland sounds entirely otherworldly and quite funny. However, that wasn't the case for the Waspi woman who came to my surgery in 2016. She retired expecting to get her state pension at 60 and had to apply to the Society for relief, and she had to sell her home because she couldn't afford her retirement as she didn't receive her pension. So, could I ask the Secretary of State, what remedies for compensation does his government consider suitable for this constituent and others that I have? And when? Should DWP have known about this issue for years and years and years?
Well, the example that the Honourable Lady has given is once again one of those, Mr Deputy Speaker, that underlines in my mind the importance of proceeding with great diligence and looking at the findings of the report in great detail. We received that report, Mr Deputy Speaker, as we all know, on Thursday. It is now Monday. I think it's not unreasonable, given its length and the complexity of the issues that are under consideration here, that we have the time to look closely at the conclusions.
John Penrose.
Mr Deputy Speaker, can I add my voice to those calling for an urgent announcement of a redress scheme in response to this report? The Secretary of State has rightly pointed out that the actions in question between 2005 and 2007 didn't happen on his watch, didn't happen on any Conservative government's watch. But if he delays, he will stop being part of the solution and start becoming part of the problem himself. And he will need all the understanding and the goodwill on both sides of this House that he can possibly muster to deal with the complexities, undoubted complexities, of distinguishing between the different kinds of and levels of indirect loss which this report points at when he comes forward with his redress scheme. So speed is vital.
Well, as my honourable friend points out, timing is important, and I have made the commitment that we will proceed without undue delay.
Winter.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Millions of women have suffered an injustice, including over 200,000 in Wales and 4,000 in my constituency of Cynon Valley. And while much of the Ombudsman's report is welcome, the compensation remedy is insufficient and indeed insulting. Now, in 2019, the Labour Party pledged an average payment of £50,500. It is affordable, and the government has saved in the region of 200 billion since the implementation of this. Yet the government still hasn't pledged anything at all. So please will the Minister agree and set a specific timeline so that we can have an urgent parliamentary process so MPs can set a compensation scheme that will give fair, appropriate and fast compensation to these women.
Well, on the issue of timing, Mr Deputy Speaker, I think I've now given that reply on several occasions from this dispatch box. There will be no undue delay. In terms of the specific matter that the Honourable Lady raises relating to remedy, that is one of the elements of the findings within the report that, of course, along with all the others, we will consider very carefully.
Bob Seeley.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Minister is right to highlight the commitment to the triple lock, that the state pension will rise by some £900 this year, that there are fewer people in pensioner poverty than ever before, and that predictably the failures here happened under a previous government. But, nevertheless, does he accept that hardship in principle has been caused both to Waspi women in the Isle of Wight but also nationally, and that a solution, whilst clearly it needs to be affordable, is needed to right a wrong which has taken place?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, but as I have been setting out, the way that we reach the point which he would like us to reach in terms of clarity, that does require us to have a very close and careful look at the report. We will do that as quickly as we are able. We will not introduce any undue delays. We will consult with Parliament in an appropriate manner, as indeed we did with the Ombudsman.
Hannah Bardell.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. It actually isn't that difficult. The Waspi women have been screwed over by the state and they've been made to wait for years. Now, I understand that the Ombudsman process had to be undertaken because the government made that happen, but it actually could have faced up to the reality much sooner. So can the Secretary of State give a guarantee to the 6,500 Waspi women in my constituency and the Waspi women across the whole of the UK that he's not going to kick the can down the road past the next election and pass the buck to the Labour Party, who can't make a promise about this either. It's not good enough to stand in solidarity and then not take action.
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, on the question of timing, I have made the position extremely clear. On the question of the fact that it took 5 years for the report, it had to gestate for 5 years. There was around a 2-year delay, actually, due to the judicial review that then went on in the middle of that process. So I think to suggest that in any way it is the government that has been holding things up is really not a fair and accurate representation of what has happened. And indeed, as I've highlighted, the Ombudsman Chief Executive has highlighted the good level of cooperation that there has been with my department.
Caroline Ansell.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for coming so swiftly to the House in the wake of the Ombudsman's report, a very important report that does, as other honourable members have said, require address and require a response. And I'd also like to pay tribute to the Waspi women in my own constituency of Eastbourne and the 4,000 women who have been affected by this change. And although I welcome all the very important pension reforms that he has outlined today, of which we can be very proud, it is worth remembering in this moment that in terms of dependence on that state pension, 68% of women born in the 1950s have relied on this, as opposed to 44% of their male counterparts, because of baked-in inequalities that they've experienced in much younger years. They started work before equalities legislation. They weren't able to join pension schemes back in the day and made very definite choices about their caring responsibilities. So for all of these reasons, I would urge, I do see this as a very specific case, and I do see a very real injustice. And I do hope when he does talk us through how this will be dealt with in Parliament, that there will be a role for MPs, individual MPs, who've worked very closely with their Waspi women to make representation on their behalf.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I can reassure the Honourable Lady that we will continue to engage with Parliament closely, as indeed we have done to date, and as indeed we did also with the Ombudsman. She raises quite fairly and reasonably gender pension gaps. It is this government that's brought in and encouraged automatic enrolment, and we've consulted on some further changes that we are considering at the moment, which has led to a narrowing of that gap as it relates to private pensions. There's always going to be more to do, but we are definitely serious about making further progress.
And Desi?
Thank you very much. Mr Deputy Speaker, the Waspi women in Slough and across our country have been campaigning courageously, consistently for years now for their rights. And it is, of course, the government's duty to set out exactly how they will help them and deliver justice. Now, Secretary of State, given that someone's entitlement to receive the state pension depends upon how many years they have been paying national insurance contributions, what will happen under the Chancellor's plans to abolish NICs for those who are yet to retire? Will they still receive their state pension to which they have been contributing, or will their entitlements change?
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, as I'm sure the honourable gentleman, because I know he's a very assiduous and sensible person, he will know that there is party politics at play over this issue, that the Chancellor has been extremely clear that it is an aspiration through time, several years, maybe even beyond the next Parliament, to bring down further the level of national insurance. And the reason why he says that is quite right, because we are a party that fundamentally believes in low tax.
Baker.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I've probably got one of the most impacted constituencies of the country in North Norfolk with my demographics, and I know that over 5,000 Waspi women have been impacted by this. I think we need to be sensible. We all recognise the financial climate that we are dealing with in this country, but I also know that the Secretary of State is a very decent man, and certainly even this weekend the Prime Minister was intimating that we have always tried to right the injustices that this country has seen. So for those Waspi women that are watching this afternoon, can he at least from the dispatch box throw them a lifeline and some sort of commitment that we will at least do everything we possibly can to try to support as many Waspi women that have been impacted by this as this country will be able to do?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the important point here is that we carefully consider this report and not any one aspect of it, but all aspects of it in its entirety. And I have undertaken to the House to do that without undue delay.
Lloyd Russell-Moy.
Thank you very much. The Ombudsperson was established to deliberate when things weren't necessarily illegal, but when things had been done that were malpractice and wrong, and needed a person in the middle to come forward and say, you need to sort this out. That is exactly what the Ombudsperson has now said. So rather than hiding behind court judgments, it might have been illegal or not in the case, the judgment is clear from the Ombudsperson that malpractice, maladministration happened. Will the Minister now apologise on behalf of the Department for that and commit to at least a remedy? I'm not saying what the remedy has to be, but give reassurance that a remedy will be found and he will apologise. Two easy things that he should be able to do now.
Well, the honourable gentleman suggests that we're hiding behind the court cases, and I've explained the relevance of those and the conclusions to which both the High Court and the Court of Appeal came in 2019 and 2020. We're not hiding behind anything. And in fact, in terms of our interactions as a department with the Ombudsman, as the honourable gentleman knows, because I read the quote out earlier, the Chief Executive on Sky News on Thursday, the 21st of March, last Thursday, said the government, the DWP, completely cooperated with our report, with our investigation, and over the period of time we have been working, they have provided us with the evidence we have asked for.
Alison Thewlis.
Waspi women in my constituency have campaigned relentlessly for many, many years now, and I pay tribute to all of them, particularly to Rosie Dixon, who has done so much around various different events around Glasgow and coming down here to put her case directly in Parliament. When Waspi women are watching this at home, when the Minister says that they're going to carefully consider things, they hear more delay. They hear they're not going to get the money they're entitled to. And they hear there are going to be too many more women who die before they see a penny from this government. When will they receive their money?
I really do think, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that suggests that coming to this dispatch box without a fully formed set of proposals in the form that the Right Honourable Lady may wish, given that the report was published as early ago as just this Thursday, is a bit of a stretch. And I think what her constituents and others will want is a government that looks very carefully, gives great consideration to the complex issues around this matter, to the findings contained within the report, and also engages closely with Parliament, exactly as we did with the Ombudsman.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The government had to be dragged kicking and screaming to even acknowledge the injustice done to thousands of innocent postmasters. This too is an incredible injustice. Millions of women born in the 1950s have been betrayed. 3.5 million women affected. One dying every 13 minutes, and we've been in this chamber for an hour. 28,000 people have signed a letter from the Waspi campaign to the Leader of the House asking for an urgent debate and series of votes on compensation options, including that proposed by the APPG on this issue. This injustice can't carry on any longer, and I know that the Secretary of State has sought to avoid answering the question, when is this going to happen? In due course isn't good enough, without due delay isn't good enough. When's it going to happen? When we're going to get to debate on it, and when are we going to get to vote on proper compensation packages?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman has been here long enough to ask questions of me at the dispatch box about when debates may or may not occur, etc., which are matters which are typically handled between the usual channels, not least between his party and mine. It's quite extraordinary that he should be trying to get me to sort of set out a timetable of debates. Many of these things will be a matter for Parliament rather than government. But he's right to raise Horizon, where I'm very proud of the fact that this government has acted at speed, has brought forward legislation to make sure that those people get the monies and the reparations that they deserve.
Tim Farron.
Mr Deputy Speaker, taking the Secretary of State back to his initial remarks as we began this statement, he said something which I think is clearly wrong. He said that women clearly had not lost out. Well, they have. Thousands in my constituency have lost out financially through no fault of their own. They planned for their retirement on the basis of out-of-date information. They then got effectively penalised for taking on caring responsibilities, including allowing their children to work and to pay taxes by providing the best kind of childcare for their grandchildren, all of which was disrupted by a collective failure of the state. And many, as has been said, have died before justice was delivered. Now, for years, those of us who sought to get justice for the Waspi women have been met with the same response: we must wait for the Ombudsman's report. Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, we now have the Ombudsman's report, so will the Secretary of State now comply, apologise to the women and pay compensation to them as recommended in the report?
Well, the reference actually that the Honourable Gentleman refers to was no direct loss, and that was a conclusion drawn by the Ombudsman in his report. As to how quickly we are able to proceed, I just simply remind him again that this report was published on Thursday. Today is Monday afternoon. These are complex matters. It is quite right and proper that they are considered in detail, very carefully indeed, but also that there is engagement with Parliament in an appropriate way, exactly as there was with the Ombudsman.
To hear Ali.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. In my own constituency of Birmingham Hall Green, I have 4,760 Waspi women who have been campaigning tirelessly for pension justice. Given that the report has now been published, will the Secretary of State commit to a timeline that will make sure that they are adequately and swiftly compensated for the harms that they have suffered?
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, as the Honourable Gentleman will know, that is a question that in various forms has been asked now probably a dozen or more times, and the answer is going to always be, at least is always going to be consistent, and that is that there is no desire to delay matters, and there will be no undue delays in terms of our deliberations.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. There can't be a member of this House that hasn't met women affected by this, that hasn't met the Waspi campaign, that hasn't been moved by the pain and the awful stories that they've been through as a result of this maladministration by successive governments. Anyone watching this today in this lengthy, convoluted statement from the Minister will be left confused as to actually what is going to happen now. Could he tell us, in words of one syllable, when those women who are victims of this maladministration will be able to receive the compensation they justly deserve?
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, with great respect to the right honourable gentleman, that is just another version of the same question about timing, and I have given a very clear answer on that matter.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I've heard many ministers stand at that dispatch box and say they're working at pace, or there's no undue delay in dealing with scandals. This is a real opportunity, I think, for Parliament. The Ombudsman laid this report in front of Parliament for a very good reason, because he didn't think the DWP would accept the recommendations around maladministration. So it would be correct, wouldn't it, that if a backbencher wished to put down an amendment to a government bill implementing the recommendations of the Ombudsman, the government would support that, wouldn't they?
Well, I think, Mr Deputy Speaker, to be invited to comment, indeed, let alone support an unknown amendment to an unknown bill is a little bit of a stretch.
Joanna Che.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Waspi campaign have asked me to emphasise their annoyance at how often government ministers, when talking about these issues, attempt to muddy the waters by referring back to the unsuccessful litigation to reverse the increase to the state pension age or to claim direct discrimination. Of course, that was not litigation by the official Waspi campaign. And I'm sure they would be very annoyed to hear a senior Labour frontbencher doing the same thing on the radio last night. So can I ask the Minister to take the chance from the dispatch box to assure the Waspi campaign that going forward, government ministers won't attempt to muddy the waters by referring back to what is now irrelevant litigation, and instead the government will focus on how to implement the Ombudsman's recommendations?
Well, I don't think I can accept, Mr Deputy Speaker, that litigation, particularly when it's in the High Courts, and I know the Right Honourable Lady will know about legal matters, and the Court of Appeal, is just not relevant, particularly as it did pertain to the matters that are under debate at the moment.
Justin Matters.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. As the Secretary of State quite rightly pointed out, this report has been 5 years in the offing, so his department have known for an awful long time that it's coming, and they must have also known it was a possibility that compensation would have been recommended. So I'm sure the Secretary of State running his department in a prudent fashion has set aside some contingency funding for that very eventuality. Can he tell us how much that is?
Well, once again, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Gentleman is trying to draw me into forming conclusions prematurely about a report that is complex, needs quite a high level of study and consideration to be given to it, and that is what we will now do.
Kirsten Oswald.
Mr Deputy Speaker, these 1950s women have been shockingly let down by Westminster. They fought this for years and years, but now instead of properly acknowledging the failings that the Ombudsman has highlighted, and as the Ombudsman Chief Executive said, doing the right thing, it feels like the Minister's come here today with precisely nothing to say. It feels like he's trying to gaslight these Waspy women. It's a disgrace, and shame on the Labour Party going along with this charade. This is a terrible, protracted injustice which has devastated the lives of so many women. It's time to give these women the justice that they deserve, give them their compensation now, before many more of them die waiting.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I can reassure the Honourable Lady that, of course, we have taken this entire situation extremely seriously. You have heard the remarks of the Chief Executive Officer of the Ombudsman relating to the quality of the engagement that the Ombudsman received from my department. I have also set out, Mr Deputy Speaker, that we provided over 1,000 pages of evidence to the investigation. And I've also reassured the House both that we will very carefully consider the findings within the report, that we will not unduly delay our response, and that we will engage appropriately with Parliament exactly as we have done with the Ombudsman.
Damia Griffiths.
Thank you very much. Mr Deputy Speaker, I must first declare an interest as a 1950s woman. Now, the Secretary of State knows absolutely that real hardship was caused for some women in this age group in 2011, when the former Chancellor George Osborne, backed by Conservative and Lib Dem members, fast-forwarded the changes. But as the Ombudsman said, previous administration in the communication of state pension age did result in complainants losing opportunities to prepare. But women affected will be very disappointed by the Secretary of State's statement, especially as the first stage of the Ombudsman report in 2021 highlighted DWP failings. So can you please be more precise than saying no undue delay, and tell us in which months we can expect a proper government response?
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, that is once again a question about what the timing is. I have given a very clear response to that. I have given an assurance to the House there will be no undue delay as we approach those matters, and that is the answer to her question.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I say to the Secretary of State, we need to recognise that the Ombudsman has said that there has been maladministration. Let's remember that. And I would say to the Secretary of State, he needs to read the room. There's a consensus right across this chamber that compensation should be paid. And let's remember that this is about women who paid national insurance, anticipating of receiving a pension, and they were hit with a bombshell that their pension was being deferred, in some cases by up to 6 years, but with only 15 months written notice. Can you imagine what would happen in this place if it was announced that private sector pensions were being put back by 6 years? Rightly, there would be outrage, and it's right that there should be outrage as to what happened to the Waspi women. This was an entitlement taken away from them. Women that had a reasonable expectation of retiring denied to them. The government should have recognised the failings and should have compensated the 3.8 million years ago. Now we have the determination of maladministration. Let's make sure this is not another Horizon or a contaminated blood story. Let's make sure that the government comes back at pace after the Easter recess with firm proposals that the House can discuss.
People can focus on their questions, please. That would be really useful. Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Well, I'm fully aware, as the Right Honourable Gentleman will know, what the findings of the report are. They do, of course, as he will know, raise many, many questions, and we need to look very carefully at those questions. We will not delay in so doing, but that is the reason why I have come to the House today to assure the House that we will do exactly that and that we will engage with Parliament in an appropriate way.
Mike Amesbury.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Today's statement, interim statement, felt like a non-statement. Spoke about clarity, but offered no clarity at all to WASPI women and certainly members of this House. Again, I will repeat what lots of people repeat across the chamber. You know, actually, on what day, in what month can we expect a full statement? And very importantly, WASPI women up and down the country expect that full statement. Yeah.
Well, the Honourable Gentleman has raised the same question that I have now probably answered and responded to probably 24 times by now, and the answer remains the same, that we will look at these matters extremely carefully, which is what everybody who has an interest in these matters would expect us to do it diligently and carefully. The report was only published as recently as Thursday. It is now Monday. We will be looking at these issues very carefully indeed. There will be no undue delay. We will make sure that we interact with Parliament in an appropriate fashion, as we did with it.
Kevin Newlands.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. It talks about time, but it's nearly a decade since the Waspi campaign started, including rallies and protests, court cases, thousands of meetings to lobby MPs and 273,000 women dying. And those who remain can perhaps see some light at the end of the tunnel. I say some light because the Ombudsman should have gone further in both the impact DWP malpractice had and the compensation it's recommending. But it looks like that light is actually a train with the Chancellor and Shadow Chancellor in control. After all that they've gone through, including my constituent, one of the test cases in the report, who at times has treated this like a full-time job, is he really going to ask them to wait just a little bit longer and then break convention and ignore the findings of the Ombudsman?
Hear, hear. Hear, hear.
Well, given that we haven't responded to the findings of the Ombudsman for the reasons that I've given, that this needs to be done in a diligent and careful manner, I'm not sure that his question entirely, or his assertion, holds water. That this report, Mr Deputy Speaker, was 5 years in the making. It is covering highly complex matters. There are many, many questions that are raised as a consequence. We will look at those questions and those findings extremely carefully and come forward to the House without undue delay, whilst engaging with the House in an appropriate way, which is what we did with the Ombudsman.
Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Thank you. The report's central finding of fact is that women born in the 1950s could not make informed decisions about their finances and that their sense of personal autonomy and financial control was diminished, with tens of thousands plunged into poverty. So the issue now is not whether these women faced injustice. The report makes clear that they did, that these women are entitled to urgent compensation from the government, and that Parliament must identify a mechanism for providing appropriate redress. So can the Secretary allay my concerns that he's not proposing to question the findings of the Ombudsman, but rather when he returns after the Easter recess, he will be setting out appropriate mechanisms for redress that we can debate in this House?
Mr Deputy Speaker, is considering the findings, and those findings need to be considered in their entirety in order to come to a view.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I want to pay tribute to the Waspi campaigners in Glasgow who I met on International Women's Day at the Mary Barber statue, including the great Cathy MacDonald, a fantastic Glasgow South West constituent. Mr Deputy Speaker, surely the Secretary of State accepts that it's unacceptable in 2024 that women continue to experience inequality in lifetime savings. Women would need to work an additional 19 years to have the same pension savings as men. So inequalities in lifetime savings, a gender pension gap and maladministration of state pension age changes. This is a triple whammy to 1950s born women. So when will they get justice and equal treatment?
Hear, hear.
The honourable gentleman concludes by asking the same question that has been asked now many times. There will be no undue delay. We will look at the issues, including some of the points that he has raised in the round, looking at the entirety of the report and all the points and conclusions that it comes to. He will know that there are many steps that we have taken to help to increase the level of women involved receiving pensions, including the auto-enrolment reforms that we have brought forward, which in the private pension space have had a very dramatic, shown a very dramatic improvement in the level of pension provision for women up and down the country.
John MacDonald.
The report is absolutely clear that the failure of the DWP, and it's a systemic failure, is that it did not even draw upon and learn from its own research about the failure of communication to these women. And in addition to that, it did not investigate properly and respond to the complaints. That's straightforward in the report. So can I say to the Secretary of State, maybe as a warning, the anger out there will be not that he hasn't come up with a scheme immediately, but he hasn't even acknowledged the failings of his own department. And that's why this report recommends it's Parliament it deals with this matter, because I believe members of this House now share the same feelings of the Ombudsman and the Waspi women, that we have no confidence in the Department of Work and Pensions in being able to resolve this basic failure that it undertook decades ago.
Well, the Right Honourable Gentleman, I think, refers to one part of the findings within the report where the Ombudsman did find maladministration, however did not find, I believe, injustice, if I understood the point to which he was specifically referring. But the point that I make to him and to others in the House is that we do need to look at this properly. We cannot simply take a report of 100 pages to which my department provided 1,000 pages of evidence, to receive that report on a Thursday and do anything other than for me to responsibly come to the House now and make it very clear that we will act without undue delay and that we will interact with Parliament in an appropriate manner, exactly as we did with the Ombudsman.
Alan Durans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good afternoon. Mr. Deputy Speaker, incredibly sadly, my constituents, Margaret Meikle and Morag Sain, are just two of a significant number of women in my constituency and elsewhere who have died whilst enduring years of prevarication and inaction by successive governments in relation to the maladministration of their pensions. It is estimated that nationally around 40,000 women have died each year who may have been eligible for compensation, and that nationally 270,000 women have already died without ever receiving an apology, justice or compensation. Will the Secretary of State commit to ensuring that due consideration will be made to compensating not only eligible women still living, but also to the relatives of those who have died whilst awaiting justice in this matter when this comes back to the House?
Hear, hear.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I say to the honourable gentleman, I listened to him extremely carefully, that I think we owe it to all those to whom he has referred and to those who may be in a similar situation, that we take this matter extremely seriously, that we look at it very carefully and that we come to appropriate conclusions whilst making sure that we interact with Parliament in an appropriate way, very much as we did in our interactions with the Ombudsman himself.
Imran Hussain.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm not sure why the Minister has come to this House today to tell this House and Waspi women nothing apart from he's considering the report. And he keeps talking about the complexities of the report. Well, one simple finding at the heart of this report is that it is for this government and this Parliament to remedy the grave injustices against the thousands of Waspi women in my constituency and the many thousands up and down this country. Honourable members from across this House have asked the Minister quite reasonably for a time scale, and he just refuses to commit and uses the words undue delay. Will the Minister at least accept every time a Minister stands up and uses undue delay or undue process, what they really mean is that we have no intention to address this, we are saving face and kicking the can down the road?
No, Mr Deputy Speaker, I do not accept that.
Jim Shannon.
Mr Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Minister very much for his statement. The Ombudsman's report has made recommendations based upon maladministration and the fact that the 1950s women were misled and not notified of their rights, and that's a very, very serious issue. Many people have contacted me. One of my constituents said that some nearly 300,000 women have passed away already and continue to pass away each day without seeing a single penny. And not forgetting those who are suffering physical and mental disabilities after a lifetime of work and child rearing. Many grandmothers have gone on to care for elderly parents or providing unpaid support so that their daughters and their sons can return to work in support of the UK economy. Time is not on the side, Mr Deputy Speaker, of the Waspi woman. Restitution, apologies, compensation. Does the Secretary of State not agree, as my constituent suggestion has made, that government agree to urgently pay a reasonable lump sum, followed by an increase in their pension payments until the deficit is recouped, thereby making this easier to balance with the public purse?
Well, I certainly do accept, Mr Deputy Speaker, that we need to proceed in a manner that does not delay matters for the reasons that he has given. And I think we do owe it to the people to whom he has referred that we do proceed without undue delay, and that we do that by very carefully considering the report in its entirety, looking very closely at its findings. I am satisfied, as indeed the Chief Executive Officer of the Ombudsman is satisfied, that the engagement between my department and the Ombudsman was full and complete, and we will continue to proceed in that basis, working closely with Parliament and, of course, also in the same spirit that we worked closely with the Ombudsman.
Morris.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. To say the Secretary of State will disappoint the 5,000 Waspi women in my constituency and the many tens of thousands across the North East is an understatement. Frankly, I think the Minister's response is shameful. Shameful. And I want to take issue with what he said about the complexity of the report. He said it's only been 5 days. A 100-page report. Well, I'm not a speed reader, but I reckon that's 20 pages a day. And the issues that are raised aren't bolts out of the blue. The Waspi women have been active, campaigning for over 10 years, highlighting the issues and the potential remedies. I don't think this will wash in the country, Mr Deputy Speaker, with the response we've had. The Minister says there are 200,000 less pensioners in poverty. 270,000 Waspi women have died waiting for justice. I want to know how many more are going to die before he finally comes along and implements those recommendations in full.
Well, Mr Speaker, the answer on timing is the same answer that I've given consistently throughout this statement, despite having been asked it. I have been asked it probably now 3 dozen times, and the answers remain the same. This is a complex report, and indeed the Honourable, if the Honourable Member would allow me, the Honourable Member should be aware that, as far as I am aware, that is not a matter of dispute, even between us on this side of the House and the opposition. We both accept it is a complex report. We both accept we need to look very carefully at the findings in order to come to conclusions, and that's exactly what we will do.
Brendan O'Hara.
Mr. Speaker, despite how the Minister might wish to spin this, the Ombudsman's report was absolutely damning, totally vindicating the Waspi women and their campaign. Too many people thought, indeed fervently hoped, that they'd give up and go away, but they picked the wrong fight with the wrong woman. And I'd like to congratulate Anne Greer and the Waspi women of Argyll and the Isles for giving up this fight. Yeah. My honourable friend from Kilmarnock and Loudon has a private member's bill, which would require the Secretary of State to publish proposals for a compensation scheme for Waspi women. The vehicle is there, Minister. Will the Government now work with my honourable friend from Kilmarnock and Loudon and support his private member's bill so that we can bring this to a conclusion as swiftly as possible? Yeah.
Well, private members' bills, and I'm not familiar with all the details of the private members' bill to which the honourable gentleman has referred, will clearly be whether a government decides to support a particular bill will be a matter for the usual channels, and will be a matter for the government business managers and a matter for the government, not for me at this dispatch box at this time.
Rupa Hart.
Mr Deputy Speaker, the Waspi website has a grim counter of affected women's deaths and of money saved by the Treasury. The figures at the moment are 273,000 plus and well over 4 billion, and they're rising by the minute. How far has their 2022 disastrous mini-budget's consequences affected their thinking on all this? And if he won't commit to full level 6 compensation as the Ombudsman recommends, what has he got to offer Linda Gregory, my constituent, born in 1953, who did the right thing, as he said? She did her sums, got her forecasts, was repeatedly assured by the DWP and HMRC that she had contributions to retire at 60 to look after her ailing mum, before this surprise was sprung on her and has cost her so far 40 grand.
I think, Mr Deputy Speaker, with great respect to the honourable lady, her question perfectly exemplifies why it is important to look at the detail of the report, because she refers to the Ombudsman having recommended the full level 6 level of compensation. It's actually level 4, which is a range of between £1,000 and £2,950. So I'm afraid that piece of information was simply inaccurate.
Kenny McCaskill.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Sadly, we've had a reprisal of known facts, not the resolution of a manifest wrong. Governments frequently have to address the faults or failings of their predecessors of whatever political hue. That's called the responsibility of being in office, and it's part of the privilege of holding government. Equally, we also have to remember that when there's an institutional failure that goes across political parties and indeed government institutions, we have independent bodies to address them, such as an ombudsman. In these circumstances, will the Minister first of all accept that there has been a manifest wrong and injustice, and secondly commit that he will not under any circumstances seek to undermine the decision of the Ombudsman or the direction of travel that she has embarked upon?
Well, the honourable gentleman is absolutely right that there is a very specific purpose for an ombudsman, as there indeed is a purpose for this ombudsman. But what I think is unreasonable is to take the step in logic from that to saying that one should just simply, within a matter of hours, stand up and accept everything that the ombudsman has put forward. What we have quite rightly said, and I'm saying at the dispatch box today, is that we will consider these matters, the findings, the circumstances and so on, in very great detail in order to come to the appropriate decisions.
Chris Law.
Mr Deputy Speaker, Waspi women in my constituency of Dundee simply cannot wait. In fact, as you've heard across this House, there's not a single constituency where Waspi women can wait. And there's a simple reason for that. 40,000 of them are dying every year. Over 250,000 have died over this 10-year campaign. And not once have they had an apology, received any justice, and certainly no compensation. The PHSO report was published. Both the UK Government and the Labour Party have deliberately failed to answer and fully guarantee that full justice and fair compensation will be delivered to the Waspi women. So a simple question is, and you failed to answer so far, can you give us a time frame by which you are going to deliver an apology, justice and compensation, and can it be before the next general election?
Well, Mr Speaker, the honourable gentleman has been in this chamber, I think, since the beginning of this statement. I'm sure he has, and he heard the statement, hence he's asking a question. And he will know that the question he has asked has been asked now probably a couple of dozen times. And the answer is the same. Well, he chunters from a sedentary position, but the answer is just the same, which is the responsible thing to do is to look at this highly complex matter. A report that was published on Thursday. It is now Monday early evening. It is not unreasonable to expect the government and indeed Parliament, because of the way the report has been laid before Parliament, to look at the detail of that report. We gave, as a department, around 1,000 pages of evidence that informed that particular report. There are some very important findings within it, and I think in order to do it justice, we need to look at it carefully.
Martin Day.
Mr Deputy Speaker. 6,900 Waspi women in my constituency, some of whom have lost out by as much as £60,000, many of them in dire need of compensation, will have found little encouragement in the Minister's statement. Can he tell me, is it this government's policy to dither, to delay and to deny justice until the 1950s-born women have died off?
Here, here.
I can give a very short answer to that. Absolutely not.
Yeah, but not far.
Ronnie Kendall. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Waspi campaign has been conducted with great dignity. They have lobbied and informed all of us in here. Can I ask that the outgoing government and the incoming government show these women some respect that they are due and commit to paying compensation? I'm not even asking for a timetable here. Just commit to paying compensation. And before the Minister says, I only got the report last Thursday, had he listened to the PHSO evidence given to the PACAC Select Committee, the writing was clearly on the wall that compensation was going to be in this report.
What I'm not really clear about, Madam Deputy Speaker, is why the Honourable Gentleman is urging me and the Government to draw a premature conclusion on the basis of, it would be premature, because as he points out, the report arrived on Thursday. It is now Monday, very early evening. It is complicated. It is absolutely right and proper that we look at it very carefully and in great detail. It is only right and proper we do that for those people that are concerned with this matter, and that is precisely what we will do. We will act without undue delay. We will make sure that we engage with this House in an appropriate fashion, as we did with the Ombudsman himself.
Stuart C. MacDonald.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the expression justice delayed is justice denied has never seemed more appropriate, with so many thousands of Waspi women waiting for justice to be delivered and dying in the process. Madam Speaker, it's not just the 5 years waiting for the Ombudsman report, but it's years before that jumping through DWP complaints process hoops and independent case examiner hoops as well. So as well as delivering swift compensation, will his government look at fixing the system that has delayed for the best part of a decade delivery of justice for Waspi women?
We will look closely at the report and we will draw, no doubt, many conclusions as a result of that process of careful examination of the findings and the points made within that report. And my commitment to the House is we will do that without undue delay, and that we will also engage appropriately with Parliament as part of that approach.
I thank the Secretary of State for his statement, and we now come to the business of the day, and the clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Investigatory Powers Amendment Bill, Lords, as amended in the Public Bill Committee, to be considered.
Now,